welcome you this evening. This actually is the final lecture that we will have for the season, and we will take our break for the summer. So it's always nice to save the best for last. It is a pleasure to have Dr. Martin Deranian here this evening. I've known Dr. Deranian for several years as a member of NAASR. I took his book, The Armenians of Husanig, with me last year when we went on the NAASR trip to historic Armenia, and that was my Bible because my family is from Husanig and Target, as is the family of Dr. Deranian and of Barbara Magarian. So he has written a second book. Oh, excuse me. Okay. How many are from Husanig? Raise your hands. We have quite a few in the room. But tonight is an exciting evening because Dr. Deranian is going to be speaking about his new book. I promised I wouldn't say anything more than that because our dear friend Dr. Barbara Magarian, who collaborated with Dr. Deranian on the book, is going to introduce him. So it gives me a great deal of pleasure to have Dr. Deranian here after many years of working on this book, and to introduce Barbara Magarian, who will introduce Dr. Deranian.
Thank you. Thank you, Nancy. As Nancy mentioned, this is a special day of celebration for all of us that we've been looking forward to for a long time. So it's a great pleasure for me to be here and to share this evening with you all. I think that many of you, probably most of you, are acquainted with Hagot Martin Deranian, who has been such a dedicated and active member of the Armenian community here for so many years. And most of us know that he's been working on a biography of the world-famous pioneering plastic surgeon, the late Dr. Varaztad Kazanjian, and now finally the biography has been published. And I think that when you see it, you'll agree that it has been well worth waiting for. In the biography titled Miracle Man of the Western World, Martin Deranian has so thoroughly captured the personality and accomplishments of his subject that the reader will feel personally acquainted with this famous plastic surgeon. Dr. Deranian has the technical background to explain the significance of his subject's accomplishments in the medical field. He is a native of the same city, Worcester, to which Dr. Varaztad Kazanjian came as an immigrant to America in the 1890s. And as Dr. Deranian himself always says, he is felt destined to write this book. And in fact, he's without a doubt the best qualified person to do so. Why is that? Well, first of all, because he's a practicing dentist of several years' experience, and also someone who's had a particular interest in the history of dentistry. He's a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania School of Dental Medicine, following his undergraduate degree from Clark University. He served for 2 years as a lieutenant in the United States Navy Dental Corps. He's been a member of the faculty of the Tufts School of Dental Medicine, where he created a dental museum. He's been recognized for his services to the profession by his election to the American College of Dentists, the International College of Dentists, and by a special award presented to him by the American Academy of the History of Dentistry. So he certainly has the knowledge and the perspective to appreciate and evaluate the services of Varaztad Kazanjian. Secondly, Martin Deranian has conducted extensive research on the early Armenian immigration to America. As Nancy mentioned, I first became acquainted with him when we worked on the publication of his first book, Husanig, referring to the village in Western Armenia that has been his father's home. That book is actually his father's memoir, which he published in a bilingual edition, but he also added to the book many things that he himself had written, most notably his own memoir of his mother, a genocide survivor, called The Wailing Well, which is a just beautiful piece of writing, one of my favorite pieces of Dr. Deranian's writing. And as Nancy mentioned, I really enjoyed working with him on this book because my own father was a native of Husanig who never talked about his early years, so I knew very little about it until I had the opportunity to collaborate on the editing of this book. From the beginning, one of the hallmarks of Dr. Deranian's publications has been a profuse use of historic photographs, which provide the reader with a visual setting for the events described in the text. This was particularly evident in his second book about his hometown, titled Worcester is America, in which he traces the experience, struggles, and achievements of the early Armenian immigrants to this country. And despite the fact that Dr. Deranian had all the necessary background to write this book, still it turned out to be extremely difficult. Because Dr. Kazanjian, for all his fame, and for all the massive numbers of books and articles that he wrote in his own field, was a modest man who did not talk about himself very much. He didn't keep a diary or a journal. He didn't have any kind of an extensive personal correspondence. And so there were very few written sources with which to trace the personal life as distinct from the professional life. With the exception of one or two in-depth newspaper interviews. We can imagine that as a poor immigrant struggling to acquire an education and to advance in his profession in an America of the early 20th century that had very little sympathy for foreigners, Dr. Kazanjian had to overcome the indifference and prejudices of his contemporaries. Yet he never spoke about this, as far as we know, and it's a very difficult thing to put your finger on. But I think Dr. Deranian has handled this in a particularly sensitive way. He had to comb through voluminous records and to interview a vast array of professional colleagues, friends, and relatives. He interviewed them in person. He interviewed them by correspondence from all parts of the United States and all parts of the world in order to piece together laboriously, like a big jigsaw puzzle, the threads of the life of this remarkable man. And I think that's the greatest accomplishment of the book, that he's able to present such a realistic picture both of the professional achievements and the personal struggles of the man who has been called the gentle genius of plastic surgery. So I think we have a great treat in store for us this evening to have the author, Dr. Martin Deranian, share with us his insights into this remarkable person who is the subject of his book. Dr. Deranian.